All right, well, good morning, Rocky Hill small group facilitators. It is Monday, August 3rd, about 8:30, 8:45, as I'm recording this live on Facebook, and it'll be uploaded to YouTube as well. So welcome. Thanks for watching wherever you're watching at and at whatever time. I'm continuing this introduction to this book of Revelation for one of our groups that's going to be starting that book soon. They've covered the entire Bible, and they've come to the book of Revelation to start. So last week I talked about the date of the book of Revelation. So I'll put a link up there if you're watching on YouTube. I'll put a little link up there you can click on to learn about the date that it was written in, or if you're on Facebook, it's down there in another video below. And so we talked about the date that the book of Revelation was written in was 95 AD. It's the last book of the Bible to be written. It's the last book that comes in order in the Bible as well. So it was written in 95 AD while John was exiled to the island of Patmos. And that's important because, like we're going to talk about today we're going to talk about 4 methods of interpreting the book of Revelation. And one of those methods heavily relies on the date of the book of Revelation. So that's why I started with the date of when it was written, because as you'll see when I go through these, one of these views naturally gets tossed out because we know the book was written in 95 AD and not before 70 AD, okay? So let's go ahead and get started. 4 methods of interpreting the book of Revelation. I've taken 3 different small group Bible studies through the book of Revelation. And when you read the book of Revelation together in a small group and people have a Bible and they're reading it together, and studying it, sometimes people have differing views about what these symbols mean and what these symbols refer to. And people naturally kind of get all over the place on what they see and think. But if you have these 4 methods of interpretation, you can take any interpretation that people have of those symbols and you can neatly put them in one of these 4 categories. So if you have these 4 categories in your mind, it easily helps people understand, I see this as this because this is how I'm approaching the book of Revelation. I see this as this because I'm approaching the book of Revelation in this way, okay? So it'll help you tremendously if you know these 4 methods of interpretation, because you can help people understand why they see the book of Revelation that way and why they see that symbol being this, because they're approaching it from this perspective, okay? So the first method of interpreting the book of Revelation is the historicist method, okay? It's a historicist, history. They see the book of Revelation as a roadmap of history. This is something that didn't really start much in church interpretation until guys like Martin Luther and John Calvin. There was a couple of them before them, but some of the reformers in the 16th century, the 1500s, saw the book of Revelation describing periods of history in the church. And naturally, guys like Martin Luther saw the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church to be the Antichrist in the book of Revelation, chapter 13, right? And so with this view, a lot of different people have had different views of what those symbols represent in the book of Revelation and how they match the history of the world. Okay, so like I shared with you, this wasn't a very popular interpretation until the 15th or 16th century. But since then, they've had to reinterpret the book of Revelation because history goes on. So it's not a very popular method. Within this view, the beast and Antichrist of Revelation 13, people have seen the beast and the Antichrist as, maybe the Pope, Napoleon, Mussolini, and Hitler. The main weakness of this view is that it has to reinterpret the book of Revelation in every new period of history, okay? So there's one method of interpretation that sees the book of Revelation as history, right? It describes periods of history. And while some people will take that for chapters 2 and 3 about the churches, that's a little bit more acceptable. Kind of these, history of the church is chapters 2 and 3. If you take chapters 4 through 22, that just becomes difficult. So that's not a very common view today. The second method of interpretation is the preterist view, okay? Preterist view, P-E-R-E-T-E-R This is Revelation as a product of its time. And the preterist view believes that the book of Revelation was written in 65 AD, which it wasn't. I explained that last week. But they believe the book of Revelation was written in 65 AD and that it describes events that happened in the first century, meaning the destruction of Jerusalem, Jesus' return in some respects, and they see it as a lot of these events taking place in Rome in the first century. These symbols and prophecies and things have already been fulfilled in the first century. That's the preterist view. It's not a very common view. It does have a lot of strong difficulties, meaning the extreme preterists would say Jesus has already returned, and things like that, which is we won't get into. You can Google preterist and read more about it. But the main flaw with the preterist view is it has to have that 65 date of when the book of Revelation was written in order for it to refer to these future events in the first century. But the book wasn't written until 95 AD. So you never really can get past that view. The third view is the easiest to explain. It's the idealist view. It sees the book of Revelation as illustrated spiritual principles. Meaning all these symbols, all these references in there, those don't refer to literal things or events or people. They're just spiritual principles. It's describing good and evil combating each other, okay? So the idealist view doesn't really see anything as concrete. They're just all spiritual principles in there, okay? That's a few people take that view today. It's not that common. The last view is the view that I take, which I believe is correct, is that Revelation is the view that Revelation is future, primarily future. That's the futurist view, meaning the book of Revelation is a blueprint of future events. And so chapter 1, John gives this introduction of Jesus coming to him and this angel giving him this vision. And at the end of chapter 1, I don't even need to read the verse, it's chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. John says, "This book that I am writing, this book of Revelation, contains the things which I've seen, the things happening now, and the things which will happen in the future." So he says, this book are the things which I've seen, the things happening now, and those things which happen in the future. That's Revelation chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. And those things happening now are what I believe to be chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation, describing the churches. That is a good condition or description of types of churches that we have today. The church in Ephesus, the church in Laodicea, the church in Thyatira, they all have these kind of carnal tendencies that the church can easily drift into. So chapters 2 and 3 describe what John calls as the things happening now. But then starting in chapters 4 and chapter 6, those are the things in the future which are yet to come. So that's the futurist view, that they would see chapters 4 through 22 being future events that are going to happen in the future. Okay? And the basis for that view is that there's certain ways that God has interacted with his people over time. He interacted with Adam and Eve in the garden in a certain way. Then he interacted with Noah in a certain way. Then he interacted with Abraham by giving Abraham the promise. Then he interacted with Moses by giving Moses and the nation of Israel law. Then he interacted with King David, giving this promise to King David that he would forever be, one of his descendants would forever reign on the throne of Israel. And then he interacted with the Jews when Jesus was on the earth and how they learned from Jesus. And then Jesus ascended and went to heaven at the end of the book of Matthew, the end and the beginning of the book of Acts, and then the Holy Spirit came. And that's how God interacts with us now, is that the Holy Spirit is on earth, moving in us, illuminating us, and helping us to know God. And that's the state that we're in now. And the book of Revelation describes, this next period of history where things change again and that these prophecies are going to happen. Okay? And so within that future view, there's usually two sub-views within that. One future view sees that the next event to happen in the history of the church is going to be the rapture, that Christ will come for his people and take them to heaven, and then there'll be a period of 7 years of tribulation. Or there's another part of the futurist view that believes that Christians have to stay on the earth during the 7 years of tribulation, and then Jesus will come back. Okay, so that's one view there, that two views within the futurist view. So there's the historicist view that describes the book of Revelation as this history, it describes the history of the church. There's the preterist view that says everything happened in the first century, almost everything, okay? Then there's the idealist view that it doesn't really refer to anything specific. They're just spiritual principles, okay? And then there's a futurist view that describes chapters 4 through 22 as being events that are going to happen in the future, okay? So if you have a good study Bible, like I have the Ryrie Study Bible, he talks about these four views in the introduction. I've seen the ESV Study Bible. It will describe these four views as well. I'm not sure about other study Bibles, but this is just good information, because as people are reading the book of Revelation, they're going to start interpreting these things and asking questions about it. And if you can just help them point out these four categories, it will simplify things. If you've got 12 people in your group, instead of having 12 different interpretations of one simple paragraph, you're going to be able to simplify it into 4 different interpretations, if that makes sense. So thanks for watching. I went a little longer today, but I just want to make sure I help that small group facilitator that's going to start the book of Revelation to have a good foundation before he and she begins. And I don't have the small group discussion book with me today, so we're going to skip that little training time for the small group. So hope this was helpful for you. Thanks for watching, and hope to catch you again on another video.